and welcome to the third episode of Himalayan Crossroads, a podcast series on the youngest, tallest, and the most dynamic mountain range of the world. I'm your host, Swati Chauhan, and our co-host, Sainako Ningtaujim, is behind the scenes for tech and logistical support. Thank you, Sainako. I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Lara Braitstein, an Associate Professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism at McGill University. She focuses on South Asian and Tibetan and Himalayan Buddhist literature and historiography. She is most well known for her book, Saraha's Edmontine Songs, a translation and literary analysis of 3 long esoteric poems by the pre-modern Mahasiddha Saraha. She has also edited Shamar Rinpoche's book, Path to Awakening. She is active in numerous knowledge mobilization activities like the Inter-University Research Group on Tibet and Himalaya in Quebec, in teaching regularly at the Rangchung Yeshe Institute in Kathmandu, Nepal, and implementing an innovative curriculum that combines academic and traditional Tibetan modes of learning at the Karmapa International Buddhist Institute in New Delhi. Today, she would be talking to us about her current research, which focuses on the life of the 10th Shamarpa, Chödrup Gyatso, a Tibetan Lama who played a complex role in the fraught relations between Tibet, Nepal, and China in the late 18th century. Professor Braitstein, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for hosting us in your office.
Oh, thank you for the introduction, Swati, and the invitation to participate in this podcast.
No, the pleasure is all ours. Thanks a lot. To begin with, could you tell us a bit about the 10th Shamarpa? Like, who's he and what are the key details of his life?
That's a harder question to answer than one might imagine, because as the 10th Shamarpa, any picture of his life also is going to invoke the 9th Shamarpa, the 8th Shamarpa, the 7th Shamarpa. He is the 10th incarnation of a lineage of lamas who are called the Shamarpas, the Red Hat Lamas. And they belong to the Karma Kagyu school. The 10th Shamarpa was born in 1742 and passed away in 1792. So he lived for a relatively short time, though significantly longer than the 9th Shamarpa, who only lived to the age of 8. So, you know, in comparison, he's quite long-lived. But he was born at a time when there was already a lot of controversy around the recognition of the 9th Shamarpa. There were 2 boys who had been recognized as the 9th incarnation. And then the one who sort of won out is the one who passed away at the age of 8. And then the people who were supporting the other candidate for the 9th Shamarpa decided to then try to push their candidate forward. Instead, what happened, instead of him being accepted and recognized, the people who had supported the 9th Shamarpa who died young then went ahead and recognized the 10th Shamarpa. So there was a struggling young 9th and a baby 10th at the same time. And so it was really hard to do things like just enthrone him and educate him. So he got moved around from monastery to monastery, and he was born into a very noble family, like a very powerful Gelugpa family, one of the other important schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and the one most closely associated with political and temporal power in Tibet at that time. He had an older brother who was the Panchen Lama. He was a cousin of the Dalai Lama. So he was really born into a powerful family. And so he attracted a lot of attention, and then his enthronement and education were really controversial because there was this other person vying for the position of the ninth Shamarpa at the same time. His home monastery, his seat monastery, is in central Tibet, Yangpachen Monastery. But because of all of this difficulty with the other person who had been recognized as the ninth Shamarpa, he ended up being taken to eastern Tibet, where there was an attempt to enthrone him as the head lama and abbot of Katok Monastery, under the guidance and with the support of Katok Rigdzin Sewang Norbu, who was a really important Nyingma Lama and a big supporter of this of the 10th Shamarpa. And so he was moving back and forth between central Tibet and eastern Tibet as a child, and came from this very powerful Gelugpa family where he was related to very important other reincarnate lamas, such as the Panchen Lama. And so this really, it created a very difficult situation for him with very little stability or continuity.
Okay. While talking, you mentioned reincarnate lama. Could you tell us what that means, or who's an reincarnated lama?
So Tibet has a really unique tradition that it innovated, or let's say that came up in the Tibetan setting, where a highly realized master who has achieved a certain level of awakening in the course of their practice is able to consciously take rebirth in order to continue their activity. And this is something that has been understood to be the case in this, in the context of Mahayana Buddhism. Since Mahayana Buddhism has existed, this has been the case that practitioners taking the Bodhisattva vow make a commitment to continue returning to benefit beings while they are on their path to awakening. But in a Tibetan setting, this became something formalized. A realized person would pass away, and then, a couple of years after they pass away, there will be some child who will start exhibiting behavior that's associated with this deceased master, or they might recognize people, or they might start saying things like, "I'm the Karmapa." And so this is something that became a tradition for a kind of spiritual patrimony, spiritual inheritance. Teachers like the Shamarpas, for example, have certain families who are devotees of the Shamarpas. They have this big monastery, Yangpachen Monastery, that is associated with the Shamarpas. Certain types of activities, certain important places are associated with each of these teachers, and then the recognized rebirth of those masters after they pass away then have to take on being the teacher to these individuals and their families, and maintaining the monastery and maintaining the traditions and those kinds of things.
Okay. You mentioned how the 10th Shamarpa had to move a lot between central and eastern Tibet. Could you tell us a bit about his circumstances of his life that took him out of Tibet?
Sure. He had a brother, an older brother, who was recognized as the Panchen Lama, which is the second highest reincarnate Lama in the Gelugpa school. And his parents, they had the same mother but a different father, lived close to Tashi Lumpo Monastery, which is in central Tibet, and where the Panchen Lamas are historically based. The Panchen Lama was very renowned, and he was by all accounts, very curious about different cultures, and I guess a brilliant and charismatic teacher. This led him to be in contact with people like Warren Hastings.
Wow.
So he was in contact with the British. This seems to have sparked quite a lot of curiosity from the Emperor Qianlong, the emperor of the Qing dynasty, who was both, it seems, quite captivated by the Panchen Lama's charisma and authority as a religious leader. And it seems a little bit not happy about his contact with the British.
Okay.
And so he kept inviting him to Beijing. And the Panchen Lama was very good at avoiding accepting the invitation for various reasons, because it was a little bit like, why do you really, like, am I really just coming as a invited spiritual leader, or am I in trouble? It was like a little bit ambiguous. And it seems he also had a very big fear of smallpox. There were many smallpox epidemics at that time in that region. And anyways, Qianlong finally convinced the Panchen Lama to come to Beijing for his birthday celebrations. He had a big birthday coming up, I think his 70th birthday or something. And so the Panchen Lama, on his way to Beijing, I think he made it to Beijing, then he got smallpox and died.
Oh.
And there's all kinds of really interesting scholarship around this, because some people say, yes, he got smallpox and died, and other people say he got smallpox and died.
Oh.
And however he died, the Qianlong sent a tribute of a substantial amount of gold to the Panchen Lama's family to be distributed as a kind of, sorry, your brother died while he was here type thing. And the 10th Shamarpa and the Panchen Lama had yet another brother who took all that gold. And so the Shamarpa was like, I want my gold. And then this other brother, so the scholarship tells us, or the records tell us, actually, I'm trying to produce that scholarship, that he then started sending communication to Qianlong, the emperor of China, saying that the 10th Shamarpa, he thinks that he was in contact with the British too, and now he's like making all this noise about wanting gold, and he's, like, trouble, trouble, trouble. We really have to look out for this guy. So at that point, the 10th Shamarpa kind of saw the writing on the wall, and he did not want to get summoned to Beijing. And so he went either on pilgrimage or on pilgrimage to Nepal in 1784.
Okay.
And it was a very normal thing for Tibetan Lamas to be going back and forth to Nepal at that time. It was a well-worn trade route and pilgrimage route. Nepalese artisans and tradespeople coming to Tibet, and many Tibetan lamas and pilgrims and tradespeople going to Nepal. And they had a very old relationship, economic and religious and cultural.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was the 10th Shamarpa's life in Nepal?
At first, it was pretty good. He was a very visible person because he was well known.
Okay, so he was a charismatic religious leader?
We don't have a lot of accounts of him as of his personality, but there were many Shamarpas before him who went to Nepal. So the Shamarpas as a lineage were well known in Nepal, so he was well received in Nepal. And he went to places like Swayambhu, Stupa, and sponsored big renovations.
Did the knowledge of him by the Qianlong Emperor or Warren Hastings impact his career in any way?
Eventually, it created problems. Nothing with contact with the British. Interestingly, no sources support this idea or the accusation that he was in contact with the British. But he really did end up having trouble with Qianlong. and with the entire Tibetan government. Because while he was in Nepal, a war broke out between Nepal and Tibet. And it was a war over minting silver currency. One of the trade agreements between Nepal and Tibet was that Nepal minted all of Tibet's silver currency. And it had been like that for, at least 100 years or so. And over time, this process that the silver had been cut with less valuable metals like copper and that kind of thing. So the coins weren't really worth their weight in silver. And then there was a new dynasty that had taken over in Nepal, and they wanted to clean this all up. And so they said, hey, Tibetans, bring us your Tibetan currency, your Tibetan coins, and we will give you not like, if you've got like 10 silver coins, we're not going to give you 10 like that are cut with copper. We're not going to give you 10 pure silver coins. We're going to give you what these are worth in actual silver. So the Tibetans were like, how about we don't do that? Because you're the ones who cut the coins, the silver to begin with. Anyways, a war broke out over that. And then the Shamarpa, the 10th Shamarpa, was in this position of being a very visible Tibetan, a foreigner, who is close to a very important family in Tibet. And now these countries are at war. So he had to show his loyalty to the Nepalese government by signing an oath called a Dharmapatra that, in which he kind of pledged his loyalty to the Nepalese government, to the king, and then he was asked to participate in negotiations with the Tibetans, on behalf of Nepal.
And how was this betrayal, if I may put it that way, received by his former colleagues or acquaintances in Tibet?
At first, well, because he helped to kind of broker a peace treaty between these two sides. And so at first it went very well. And it was like, oh, thank goodness, he knows both sides of this setting culturally, politically, religiously. And so he was able to broker this peace. But then the Tibetans broke the terms of the peace agreement. And so then the war broke out a second time. And this time they didn't broker a peace immediately. The Nepalese army went deep into Tibet, all the way to Tashi Lumpo Monastery, where the Panchen Lama and the 10th Shamarpa's family and everybody was. And so the 10th Shamarpa was again asked to try to broker a peace agreement, but it didn't work out this time. And the Tibetan delegation got taken hostage and then brought to Kathmandu. And so it turned into a huge fiasco. And so then he started being cast by some people as a traitor. He was reportedly saying that, he was trying to do his best to ensure the safety of the hostages and to make sure that everything was going to be okay. But it became easier to talk about him as a traitor in this situation. And the story really got elaborated that he had told the Nepalese army to go specifically to Tashi Lumpo Monastery and loot it, because this is where famously the gold that he had wanted from the Qianlong emperor was going to be retrieved. And so that it was like this deep personal grudge that he had. This is kind of how the story gets told.
Complicated.
It gets complicated. And it's also it's not a very credible story. The tale is that, he told them where Tashi Lumpo is, and he told them where to find all the gold and all these kinds of things. But Tashi Lumpo it's not a little out of the way place. It's a massive, wealthy monastery that you pass on your way to Lhasa. Nobody needed to be told where it was. So they knew where it was, and they knew where the wealth was in the monastery. And so it actually, and the 10th Shamarpa was not running the Nepalese military. Like a lot of power is attributed to him in this narrative. But eventually, the Nepalese army got as far as Tashi Lumpo, looted everything on their way there. And at that point, Qianlong, the Tibetan army, was really having trouble fighting against the Nepalese. Qianlong then sent his army to defend Tibet, to fight against the Nepalese. And so the Chinese army, which had a lot of Tibetans in it, just by the way, was sent to Tibet to push back the Nepalese army, which they did. They pushed them all the way back to the Nepalese border. And then further, they came apparently within something like 15 kilometers of Kathmandu. And then the 10th Shamarpa died. And we don't know how.
All in to say he passed away in controversial circumstances.
Yes.
And there is little clarity about his involvement or about his stature at that point of time.
Exactly. And then the Chinese army really started to struggle once they were over the border in Nepal, because suddenly they're in the hilly region, and they had been in a very high plateau before that, and they were kicking butt when they were in this high plateau. But once they were in this hilly region, they didn't know how to fight, and the Nepalese did. And so the fighting got more messy. And so everybody wanted peace at that point in time. And so they actually worked it into their peace agreement to blame the 10th Shamarpa.
All three parties?
Everybody. They were just like, the Nepalese were like, he told us to do it. And then, the Chinese general was like, yeah, he's despicable and he should be punished. But he's dead, so we want to punish his remains. So send his remains back to Beijing. And then the Tibetan government said he's like, no more reincarnations for you. So they forbade you can't forbid someone from being reborn, but you can stop people from being enthroned and recognized.
The recognition of that reincarnation was sort of prohibited.
Yes.
And what's the status of that now? Or like, how did it continue, work out, or just go into oblivion?
It did not go into oblivion. It was, so the oral records of the Kagyu lineage tell us, the Shamarpas continued to be recognized, but just on the down low until the 20th century. And what happened in the 20th century is that the 14th Shamarpa, so the 11th, 12th, and 13th were like recognized. But then the 14th was the nephew of the 16th Karmapa. And the Karmapas are the head of the Kagyu lineage, the Karma Kagyu. And when the 16th Karmapa left Tibet, as the People's Liberation Army was annexing Tibet, and a lot of the High Lamas left, like the Dalai Lama and the Karmapa and many others, the Karmapa brought with him a number of high incarnate lamas from his lineage who were all little boys at that time, including the 14th Shamarpa. And they set themselves up largely in Rumtek in Sikkim. And in 1963, the Karmapa had petitioned the Dalai Lama to permit him to restart the enthronement for the Shamarpas. And in 1963, the 14th current Dalai Lama gave permission to restart that reincarnation lineage. And so the 14th was then enthroned and then raised among the other important reincarnate lamas or tokus of the Karma Kagyu lineage. because these stories take place across lifetimes. When the 16th Karmapa passed away, then there was a big split in the lineage over the recognition of the 17th Karmapa. And one of the kind of main person behind one of the candidates for the 17th Karmapa was the 14th Shamarpa, which then got cast by the people who were really supporting the other candidate for 17th Karmapa as aha, we knew the Shamarpas were corrupt. Look what the 10th Shamarpa did. He was a traitor to our country, and he, blah, blah, blah. And so that narrative of the 10th Shamarpa was then brought to kind of cast the 14th Shamarpa in a really negative light. And so the saga has continued.
The controversial legacy of the 10th Shamarpa continues. I have a question. When we think of Buddhism, and specifically Tibetan Buddhism, we imagine a very exclusively peaceful, pacifist religion. And of course, this is a romantic idealization and not a historical reality. But in your work and in your interaction with other scholars and overall, how do you bridge the gap between this stereotype or a romantic perception and the historiographies like this, like the 10th Shamarpa?
I see it as part of the work that I want to do as a scholar to help people who are curious about the tradition to understand that it's really complex. There's nothing less human about people who are practicing Tibetan Buddhism. It's in a setting like Montreal in 2025, people might, someone who's not coming from a Tibetan Buddhist background might be looking for something like a way to be more peaceful and calm and a little bit spiritual and all of these things when we go to a local Tibetan Buddhist center. But in its own proper setting, where the religion infuses every part of people's lives, people have very complete and very complex lives where being an aristocrat or a farmer, how do you integrate your religious practice into that? Do you, are you someone who has traveled a lot? Are you someone who's been in the same village your whole life? Are you a man? Are you a woman? There are so many different things that come to bear on how the religion is lived and experienced. And so I do have some hesitations about publishing my scholarship, because it's not just that it's showing very clearly that Tibet was just a normal nation that had an army and went to war and broke treaty agreements and those kinds of things. It was just a normal place. In addition, though, the complex relationship of Tibet and China, the light that it casts on that, or that it sheds on that, is something that I feel a little bit hesitant about writing about. And also, the information is clearly there, and that too is a complex and nuanced situation where there's a long, old, deep relationship between Tibet and China, and who has been up in whose grill has shifted and changed over the centuries. And it's not a clear-cut case of, this has always been like this and this has always been like that. It's just not that simple. And so, I'm trying to summon the courage to wade into that.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to it, and all I can say at the moment is thank you for your work. But I have a personal query.
Yeah.
So you are sharing very nuanced, very skillfully articulated and extracted like an insider out and a critical scholarly perspective, not just on the career and the legacy of the 10th Shamarpa, but issues involved in his historiography and in the internal dynamics of the different schools of Tibetan Buddhism. What are your sources? Do you look at the autobiographical or biographical writing of these important figures? Are there like journalistic writings by the schools themselves? Do you look at their esoteric and religious writings? Like, what are your sources in your scholarship?
One of my most important sources is the writing of somebody named Doringpa, who is the aristocrat who was held hostage in Kathmandu. He's an aristocrat. He's not a religious leader. He has this really interesting perspective on everything. He's speaking about it from a very like political, social point of view. And so he describes conversations with the 10th Shamarpa and the vibe in Kathmandu at that time and his experiences as a Tibetan, staying in Nepal during this time of war. And so that is one of my really important sources because it brings such a different point of view from many of the other sources, which are largely religious writings. Tibetan literature is full of life writing, sacred life writing. And so I have been looking at the hagiographies of obviously the 10th Shamarpa, but his story there's this huge work that is it's like a garland of stories of all the great lamas of the Kagyu lineage, and each one of them, it's a multi-volume Tibetan work that was written in the 18th century. His life story is the last entry, and the author died before the 10th Shamarpa. So it only covers his life until his 20s. Whereas in everybody else's case, we have the full life and then the list of their major disciples and their major written works and that, like, all of these kinds of things. His story just kind of gets cut off when a lot of important information would be there. So I've got a certain amount from that story. I have a certain amount from correspondence between people like Katok Rigdzin Sewang Norbu and the 8th Situ Rinpoche, who's another incredibly important Kagyu Lama. So a correspondence between them has been preserved in their respective collected works. And so they're writing each other letters about this recognition process and finding the 10th. Well, first finding the 9th and the stuff around that, then finding the 10th and how to enthrone him and where to enthrone him. Like, there are all of these different pieces of information that I've been able to find there. And then in some of the places, like in Nepal at Swayambhu, for example, the bell that the 10th Shamarpa made is still there. And this inscription from his teacher that he had repaired, like, all of those things are still there. And so he's still part of the cultural memory of that very important religious site. And so you can, and as I have, speak to people, local people, Nepalese, the acharyas who are there living in Swayambhu and kind of maintaining the place spiritually. They have their stories of the 10th Shamarpa. And in Nepal, he's remembered as a great religious leader, not as a political person. And so there are these Nepalese sources. I've been looking at military histories of that period, and I spent time in the British Library going through a lot of British correspondence in that period, and there are a lot of references to him, none about correspondence with him, but he's definitely a player in that very, in this moment in British history when they're trying to position themselves so they have access to maximum resources and territory, and are trying to present themselves as neutral. So they're refusing to take sides because they're hedging their bets. They don't want to get involved in a war between Nepal and China or Nepal and Tibet because they want to make sure they're on the side of the winner when there is a winner. And so, they're talking, there's letters, correspondence about who was involved with what. So his name has come up there a lot as well.
Could I ask what led you to this project?
Sure. So in your introduction, you pointed out that I was the translator of the 14th Shamarpa's book, The Path to Awakening, which is his commentary on a Lojong mind training text. And so I had the very immense pleasure and honor of knowing the 14th Shamarpa, the now late 14th Shamarpa. And he was very supportive of the work that I was doing on Saraha. He is one of the people to whom I am incredibly grateful for reading through this very difficult esoteric text with me. And after I finished that project, he said, "You should write a history of the Shamarpas." And I wanted to do that. And then the more I dug into it, the more I realized it's a massive amount of material. Mm-hmm. So then I decided to just write about one Shamarpa. And the 10th Shamarpa just
caught your eye.
It caught my eye. I was going to say it was shiny, but yeah, same thing. It caught my eye because it's so there's so many different angles to it, religious and political and social, and then it's got all these repercussions in the 20th and 21st century as well. So yeah, I just dug into it.
Oh my God, I'm very thankful for your deep engagement with the 10th Shamarpa. And as you said, it's not just with his life, but the legacy and the intense debates around his reincarnation, and then the recognition of that reincarnation and his legacy, his post-mortuary legacy, still continues in the recognition of later Shamarpas as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I wish you all the best for this project, and I'm eagerly waiting for how it turns out.
Thank you so much, Swati.
Thank you for sharing all your insights and extremely nuanced perspectives.
Thank you so much.
This was the third episode of Himalayan Crossroads, and we had Professor Braitstein talk to us about an intensely engaging project about the controversial, unclear, and significant legacy of the 10th Shamarpa, Chödrup Gyatso, in the international relations of Tibet with China and Nepal, and also the intense political and religious conflicts, if I may say, within Tibetan Buddhism. If you like our content, follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next episode.